we go. So tonight I'll just give a quick introduction on what the zoning ordinance is, why the county is undergoing this process, provide a quick overview of our project progress to date, and the next few steps of our project over the next few months. I'll go over the draft structure of the zoning ordinance and highlight some of the major changes. And then after the presentation is over, over here we've got copies of this feedback form. If you picked up an agenda, the QR code is the exact same. You can fill this out as a paper copy or scan the QR code and do it digitally. It is the exact same thing, but if you do have feedback you would like to provide to the Board of Supervisors and the Planning Commission, please scan the QR code or fill out the paper copy. We will be taking all of those comments and giving them directly to the board and the Planning Commission at our next meeting with them. So again, if you have something specific you would like to say, a comment or a revision you'd like to request, please fill out that survey at the end. Next slide. So a zoning ordinance defines how land in the county is used and developed. So it regulates the form of development through requirements such as setbacks, building footprint, minimum acreage, but it also governs the character of development through design standards, through performance standards, how development in the county looks and feels. So zoning is permitted by the Code of Virginia, state law. There are some elements of the zoning ordinance that are required by state law for inclusion. So the state says some things have to be in Pittsylvania County zoning ordinance. Sorry, there's no way around it. But other elements of the zoning ordinance, most of the elements of the zoning ordinance can be defined and set by Pittsylvania County. So the zoning ordinance also sets standards for structure size, height, area, and location. It ensures community well-being. It ensures that development in the county is high quality, having the best interests of the community in mind, having a balance between growth and development in appropriate locations, in a manner that's complementary to the character of the county, while preserving agricultural and rural character. That's the balance that we're trying to get at with the zoning ordinance. I also want to point out that the subdivision ordinance is also the other piece of the puzzle that is regulating land use and development here in the county. But the subdivision ordinance is not being updated as part of this process. It is just the zoning piece. So why are we updating the zoning ordinance? The first, of course, we want to make sure that the county complies with all of the mandatory state code requirements. So we want to make sure that checkbox is checked. We also want to make the ordinance understandable, easy to use by the community, easy for staff to administer and enforce. Some of you may be aware that the county's zoning ordinance has not seen a significant update since 1991. That is a very long time. A lot has changed in the county since then. And so we want to make sure that the ordinance language is understandable, that the uses in the zoning ordinance are up to date, that they're reflecting modern land use trends, and that it's essentially able to serve the needs of the county at the present time. So addressing those modern issues, uses, and best practices, cleaning up the language, reorganizing it to make it as simple and easy to use as possible. Streamlining content to be more user-friendly, easy to find and interpret. If you all are familiar with the current zoning ordinance, hopefully you'll see that the proposed draft zoning ordinance is much more structured. We have tried to pare down the language, make it as clear as possible, while still maintaining those regulations. And then finally, revising the zoning ordinance to consider the recommendations of the county's comprehensive plan. And if you're not familiar with the comprehensive plan is the county's policy guide for land use and development. So the zoning and the subdivision ordinances are the law, they are regulatory in nature. The comprehensive plan just provides the goals and the foundation for those regulations. So making sure that the regulations and the zoning ordinance are carrying out the vision of the comp plan for land use and development in the county. So what does zoning look like? One of the biggest pieces of zoning is district standards. So if you are familiar with setbacks, maximum height, minimum acreage of your property, road frontage, all of those are district standards, and they uniformly apply to all of the development in a district. So commercial development has the same set of standards they must follow. Industrial development has the same set of standards. Residential, ag, so on. You can see on your screen that there are two graphic examples of district standards, one related to height regulations and the other related to setback and lot coverage regulations, intended to show, when we say maximum building height, where are we measuring it from? What does that mean? Same with setbacks. When we say a front setback, what does that mean? How is it measured? And so these and other graphics have been incorporated into the zoning ordinance, again, with the goal of making it easy to read, easy to understand what's required, and then also helps county staff, if any questions arise, they are able to interpret and administer the ordinance as it's intended. Uses are also addressed in the zoning ordinance, and in the draft zoning ordinance, similar to the county's current ordinance, uses are kind of grouped into major categories. So of course, agricultural uses and residential uses, but also public and civic uses, commercial uses, industrial uses, and accessory uses. So some uses are appropriate in some areas, but not in others. For example, a car dealership is appropriate in a commercial area, but a car dealership would not be appropriate in a residential area or an ag area. Other uses may be appropriate, provided that they adhere to certain standards. So special events, festivals, concerts, fairs, they may be appropriate, but only if they follow additional standards that are meant to limit negative impacts on the surrounding properties. Things like noise, dust, odor, traffic, making sure that uses are compatible with what's around them. Zoning also governs the way uses and development in the community look and feel, addressing and providing regulations for signs, lighting, parking, landscaping, and screening. Again, not to try and burden developers, but to make sure that the type of development in Pittsylvania County is high quality, it's meeting the community's needs and desires, and it's going to overall serve a net positive benefit for the community. So that is kind of a high-level tour of the zoning ordinance, and I will also note that over here on this table, we do have some informational guides to zoning, to district standards, and to use performance standards. Feel free to pick any or all of those up and take a look at them if you're interested in learning more. And of course, we'd be happy to answer any questions you may have as well. So this is where we are in the update process. I know this slide is probably a little bit hard to see, but we started off the process in August of last year with a community input phase. Some of you may have participated in that phase, which consisted of a survey. We had stakeholder interviews, and we also had an in-person public workshop similar to what we're doing tonight. So all of those were held in August, open to everyone, advertised to the county, and we held those for the purposes of hearing from the community what the goals are for land use and development in the county. What types of development are appropriate? What's not appropriate? What do you want it to look and feel like? Those were some of the questions and conversations that we had during the community input phase. We then have been meeting every other month with the Board of Supervisors and the Planning Commission for about a year now to draft the zoning ordinance, taking it a little bit at a time, working through it with the Board and Planning Commission, working through it with county staff as well, and updating and refining the ordinance based on their feedback. And that brings us to where we are tonight, the second public review phase of the process and this public open house. And then we will be having one final work session with the Planning Commission, Board of Supervisors, and BZA. That will be on, I believe, January 23rd of next year. All of the work sessions are open to the public, so if you have not been to one, I would encourage you to do so. Because they are work sessions, there is no public comment period. However, it is a really good way to come hear what the Board and Planning Commission have been talking about, and you can provide comments from there accordingly. And then from that final work session, we will be making final changes to the ordinance, and then the Board of Supervisors and Planning Commission will both be holding public hearings in the spring. So you all have this evening, there will be the final work session to attend, and then you all will have 2 public hearings before the Planning Commission and the Board in the spring, if you all would like to attend and or provide comment at that time. The dates for the public hearings have not been set at this point in time. We are still working with the county to determine those, but the county will be advertising when those dates are confirmed. So on your screen, you can see the proposed ordinance structure. Again, if you're familiar with the county's current zoning ordinance, you'll see that it has been streamlined quite a bit, again, with the purposes of making it easy to use, kind of go section by section and understand what is being required. Next slide, please. So I'll be talking for the next few minutes kind of at a very high level about the changes. There is a changes summary on the table over here, and this document goes article by article, the whole zoning ordinance, and describes in a little bit more detail some of the major changes that are proposed to the ordinance. So if you all are interested in learning a little bit more, please pick up one of those, read through it tonight, read through it when you get home, and that will have some more information for you as well. So we will start with Article 1. Article 1 is really driven by the Code of Virginia. It has a lot of state code boxes that the county has to check, and so Article 1 is just making sure that everything that is required by state code related to the just general provisions of the zoning ordinance, the purpose of the ordinance, the county's ability to have and enforce the zoning ordinance, all of that is in Article 1. Article 2 is the administrative article of the zoning ordinance, and what this article does is outlines the powers and duties and meeting procedures of the zoning administrator, Planning Commission, and Board of Zoning Appeals. This is another piece of the zoning ordinance that is largely driven by Code of Virginia requirements. This article also addresses enforcement procedures and procedures for violations of the ordinance, how property owners are notified of violations, how violations are penalized, along with taxes and expenses paid. One of the major changes in this article that I would like to point out is the introduction of civil penalties as the first line of defense for zoning violations. Right now, if you have a violation of the zoning ordinance, there's no option for a civil penalty. It is just a misdemeanor. This is something that is very burdensome. It's not always appropriate to just go straight to a misdemeanor. And so allowing civil penalties, fines, is the first line of defense of violations. It makes it easier for the county to put time and resources towards more serious violations or repeat offenders, and hopefully it is a little bit easier for the community as well in terms of time. Next slide, please. So Article 3 is permits and applications. So application requirements and review procedures for all of the different processes you see on the screen. Special use permits, variances, COs, if you request a written determination from the zoning administrator, how a rezoning can be initiated, who can initiate a rezoning, what is required of a site plan, when should that site plan be submitted. All of the nitty-gritty detail is in Article 3. So site plan requirements have changed considerably from what is in the current ordinance. We have strengthened the requirements for site development plans as well as conceptual plans to be able to give the county some more information when they and the Planning Commission and the Board are reviewing applications. We have also removed the the requirement to submit a site development plan at the application stage. So right now, if you apply for a rezoning, you're required to submit a site development plan, a full site plan at the time of application. We have removed that requirement, are proposing to require that you just have to submit a concept plan first, and then once your rezoning has been approved, then you can submit a site plan. This is a best practice that is used around Virginia. It is much more time and cost effective for developers, and it's one of the pieces to making the county's zoning ordinance more business friendly. So I wanted to point that out, and then I also wanted to point out that another major change in this article is adding some requirements related to public hearings and notifications. We've created a new division to ensure that the county is complying with all state code requirements for notifying the public when public hearings are happening, land use changes are happening, and so on. Article 4 is district standards. We can take questions at the end, if you have one. Thank you. Article 4 is district standards, and this article provides the purpose and standards for development in the county's primary zoning districts. So we have significantly edited the standards in this article, primarily through introducing charts, tables, and graphics throughout the article to be able to try and communicate the standards a little bit more clearly, make sure they're being applied consistency, and make sure that you all as the community understand them. So this is an example of a district standards table for the agricultural zoning district. All of the other district standards tables look similar. You can see that by having everything in a table format, it makes it really easy to say, okay, if I'm in the, that's residential, but if I'm in the R1 district, what is my minimum lot area? What is my lot width? What are my minimum setbacks? It's easy to just go through, understand them. There are graphics in the zoning ordinance to help you understand them further. And so hopefully, again, making that development process a little bit more easy, a little bit more business friendly, and a little bit easier for staff to administer and enforce. I will say that over behind me, there are the district standards tables for commercial and industrial regulations. So if that's something that happens to interest any of you all, we've got that and a little bit more information over there. So Article 5 relates to overlay zoning districts, so providing the purpose and standards for the 3 overlay districts in the county. So if you're not familiar with what an overlay district is, overlay districts have standards that are applying on top of the underlying primary zoning district. So you can think of it as a layer cake. The first layer in the cake is your primary zoning district, so your agricultural, residential, commercial standards, and then the second layer of the layer cake is your overlay district requirements. So you're having to have both the residential, whatever the primary district is, and then if you're in an overlay zoning district, those requirements apply on top of it. The county's zoning map has those overlay districts. I'll also note that the county's zoning map is not being updated as part of this process, just the zoning text. So if you are wondering, am I in an overlay district? Am I not? I'm in an overlay district now. Is that changing? The answer is no. And Emily can answer more questions about the zoning map if you have them. If you're familiar with the overlay article, it's not changing too much. Just wanting to make sure again that regulations are clear and organized. So Article 6 is our use matrix. This is one of the most significant improvements to the ordinance. If you look at the zoning ordinance right now, if you want to know what uses are permitted in certain districts, you will have to look down a very long and lengthy list. What this does is it puts all the uses in a table, and you can easily see, okay, in all of these districts, is the use permitted by right, permitted through a special use permit, or not allowed at all? So making it very quick and easy to say, I want to operate a bed and breakfast. Where can I do that? How can I do that? Is it just by right or through a special use permit? to make the ordinance much easier to read, find what you're looking for, and find it quickly. Something else that I'll say really quickly that we've done with the use matrix is that you'll see that some of the use terms are changing. So again, wanting to make sure that modern uses are reflected, that uses that the community wants are included as uses. Some examples of this are short-term rentals, food trucks, special events, uses that are not currently in the zoning ordinance now, but that are, they're part of land use in Virginia, they're part of land use in the region. The community has expressed a desire for them, and so they have been included in the use matrix. Some uses are also required for inclusion by the Code of Virginia. An example is agritourism. State code requires that agritourism is permitted as a by-right use in all agricultural districts, and state code also has a definition of agritourism that we have to include, so making sure that the ordinance is compliant with that, any uses and definitions that are required by the state. Next slide. So Article 7 is use performance standards. These provide provisions and regulations to limit the impact of certain uses on surrounding properties in the county at large. So these pertain to named uses, whether they are permitted by right or by special use permit. You still would have to follow the use performance standards. Something really important to note is that if your property, if your use is already operating at the time of adoption of the new zoning ordinance, it is grandfathered in as a legally non-conforming use. So when the zoning ordinance is adopted, if you've got a business, if you've got a farm, if you've got your house, a factory, it can continue operating as it always has been. When the new zoning ordinance happens, you are not required to bring your property into compliance or your use. The only way a use would have to come into compliance with these new standards is if your use expands or if your use stops operating for 2 years and you want to start it back again, then you would have to comply with zoning ordinance. But if you're here tonight and you're like, well, I've got a small business, do I have to meet all these requirements? The answer is, if you're going to keep doing what you're doing, then no, you don't have to. So I do want to point that out. Not all uses have use performance standards. Some do, some don't. We've taken a look at what the county currently requires, again, as well as best practices and anything that the state requires, and made sure that's included. So Article 8 is community design standards, and this is the article that provides regulations related to the aesthetic, quality, and character of development in the county. So as you can see, lighting, landscaping, visibility clearance, walls and fences, parking and loading, signs, open space, there are standards for all of those. The purpose of those is, yes, to take a look at the physical quality of development, but also to add an element of safety and well-being for the community. A really good example of that is visibility clearance, making sure that development has proper visibility clearance at an intersection for safety reasons. It's something that VDOT also requires. Signs, making sure that signs are not too big, too tall, they're not flashing at you as you're trying to drive down a road. Community design standards are also for a safety and well-being perspective as well. So I'll just go quickly through these. Lighting, these are new standards, they're based on best practice. They don't apply to all zoning districts, just a select few, namely commercial zoning and multifamily zoning are 2 examples. Landscaping and screening standards are completely new, and they are based on best practice. In some of our research, we've kind of taken a look at what counties in the area are doing. A lot of developers, builders, architects, they are operating at a regional level, and so trying to get a feel of what they might be seeing elsewhere, what might be appropriate in a county, what is happening in another county that's not appropriate, thinking about that as well. There is a board, the third board over here, talks a little bit about going in commercial and industrial areas if you're interested in that. Walls and fences, examples of requirements include those related to height, materials, and location. So you can't build a 20-foot tall fence, you can't build your fence out of trash. Again, making sure that some health and safety standards are adhered to. Parking and loading, editing standards to make sure that parking requirements are reasonable and that parking lot areas are safe and well designed. Signs, updating requirements to be content neutral. This means that the county cannot regulate your sign based on what is written on the sign, making sure that those First Amendment rights are protected. The county can only regulate a sign based on the physical quality, so height, size, other things. They can't regulate based on the language of the sign. Open space, adding some requirements for open space with the intent of preserving natural resources, enhancing stormwater management, and providing gathering space for the community as well as recreational opportunities. Article 9 relates to non-conforming uses, lots, and structures. Again, we've got a guide to nonconformities over here on the table if you're interested. But again, talking about when a use can be legally grandfathered in, but when it might have to come into compliance with new regulations. There's a point when if a use substantially changes, expands, or if it stops operating for 2 years or more and tries to pick back up. The article talks about how those can be brought back into compliance. I'll also say that this article does talk about the process for rebuilding structures or your use if it's damaged by a natural disaster or other act of God, not necessarily needing to conform. The article talks about all of that. And then last but not least, we have our definitions article. So making sure that all of the uses, all of the terms in the zoning ordinance are defined clearly for reference by the community and by staff. We've reviewed all of the definitions, we have updated them as needed, we've added new definitions where we've introduced new uses, and we have also updated with state code definitions and requirements, again, just to make sure the county is complying with those. So where are we going from here? The immediate next step is the final drafting work session. That will be the afternoon of January 23rd. I believe that is a Tuesday. That will be a meeting between us, the Board of Supervisors, and the Planning Commission. The purpose of that meeting, I will say, is to review community feedback. That is almost exclusively what we'll be talking about at that meeting. So again, if you have a comment you would like to make or a revision you would like the board to review at that meeting, please scan the QR code or fill out that paper. We give them verbatim to the board. It was really important, so we would request that you fill that out tonight. The Planning Commission public hearing and board public hearings are again TBD at this point, but they are tentatively planned for March and April. They will be happening sometime in the spring, so keep an eye out for those. So that concludes our presentation and just a couple of housekeeping things. Again, please fill out the survey. I truly can't say it enough. It is really important. We read them, staff reads them, the board will read all of them. So please fill that out. Rebecca and I and Emily will be available for questions, comments. We've got some additional information on the boards up here. Those two boards over here are kind of more interactive. It gives you a summary of different changes, and then you can kind of say, yes, I like this, or no, I don't. And we'll be giving that to the board as well. This is not a public hearing, so we don't have a formal comment period. We would just ask that you come talk to us directly. That will able to make sure that we're able to answer everybody's questions and kind of have one-on-one conversation. And then we'll be here until about 7:30. So feel free to stay as long as you like between now